a lot of the work I do, I just see it as taking the blinders off, breaking the chains, and helping people discover in their freedom all the truth that's out there to be known.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for the Forum, author, and speaker. In this episode, I ask Dr. Stacy Trasancos, science versus scientism, what's the diff? An additional question might be, and why does it matter? In an article on crossway.org website, I ran across this definition of scientism. Roughly, scientism is the view that the hard sciences like chemistry, biology, physics, and astronomy provide the only genuine knowledge of reality. At the very least, this scientific knowledge is vastly superior to what we can know from any other discipline. I first became acquainted with Dr. Trasancos around 2016 after hearing her talk on the radio about her new book, Particles of Faith, A Catholic Guide to Navigating Science. Along with her pronouncement that science is the study of the handiwork of God, an utterance that stopped me in my tracks. It was the most beautiful description of science I'd ever heard, and I knew somehow that it was true, and that it had always been true, but that we'd lost this truth somewhere along the way. But back to scientism. If all that we definitively know can only be grasped through science, what do we do with religion, with mystery, and with other ways of knowing things, such as through, reason? We'll see what Dr. Trasancos has to say about all this, as well as considering some of the pitfalls in using scientism as the only lens with which to view the world. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive right in. Well, welcome, Dr. Trasancos, or Stacy, as I know you much more. It's so great for you to be able to be on Matters of Soul Importance today, and also just for me to be able to have a chance to talk with you again.
Yes, it's great. I'm looking forward to just talking with you, Roxanne. Thank you for having me on your show, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the last time I saw you a few years back, you were a keynote here in Fargo for a local Real Presence Radio annual fundraising banquet. And at that time, I had a chance also to interview you for a Forum article previewing that event, and had the additional privilege of having lunch with you here in Fargo. So during those conversations, while we talked about everything from family and our faith, but also a little bit about your work, and this idea of scientism came up at some point. And it's just something that I wanted to circle back to, because I think it's something in our world right now that people are a little bit confused about, and maybe had never heard of that term scientism, but I think you have a pretty nice grasp of it. So we'll talk about that later. But for now, I just want to hear a little bit about you. So tell us where you're from, and a little bit about your background as far as a scientist, and how that all began.
Sure. It's a long story, and I'll try to keep it very short, but I really never knew there was a conflict with faith and science, or religion and science, or theology. I didn't even know what that word was when I was growing up. But I never thought of there being a conflict, because I remember my mother growing up Baptist telling me that God made everything, and we had little songs about that, and it just made sense. I think that fed my love for science as I grew up. But then something happened to me, and I only realized it on reflection, that I started to think science had better answers, or the answers. And I started to lose faith in the religion of my childhood. The Baptists, not to beat up on Baptists, but they didn't have answers to my questions, and about God, and about what we believe, and about why we do things the way we do, and what's the meaning of it all, what's underneath it all. There just weren't answers for that. And so without realizing it, I guess I just did what so many people in our culture have been doing for decades now. As I got older and I studied science, I saw religion as childish, and something like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny is something I needed to outgrow. that maybe sometimes people just didn't outgrow it because they needed that for comfort. But I wanted to move on. And so when I went to college and studied biology, I just let go of my religion. I lost my religion, like that REM song from 1991. It was a popular song the year I went to college. And so it didn't seem like a big deal to me. And I didn't really think about the life I had chosen without belief in God. I never called myself an atheist. That was too religious for me. I didn't care. I just didn't think about it. I didn't think about how that impacted me personally until I got into my 30s and realized I'd made a mess of my life and I needed a moral code and I didn't know how to find one. And I didn't want to go back to the Baptist church and I wasn't sure where to go. And I found my way into the Catholic Church. And I only then, after getting into the Catholic Church and deciding to study theology because I wanted to understand more about what our faith teaches, and I thought dogmatic theology was a good way to learn that. It was only then I realized how pervasive this idea of a conflict between science and religion is in our culture. And so I kind of arrived at it through science, through my love of science. I came back to Christ and was so happy to realize the order in the world in a much more mature way than when I was a kid, to realize there's an explanation in the Catholic Church for why there's order and intelligibility in the world. And then I was shocked that everybody else didn't see that compatibility too. So I've just been speaking up about it for the last 10 years, hoping to resolve some of this conflict.
You're such a valuable asset because you do have that scientific knowledge and as well that faith. And when you were talking earlier, you talked about how they're in conflict, but of course we know that they're not in conflict.
No.
But the world presents them that way. Talk
Yes.
a little bit about that. Like they really, and it was Pope Benedict the 16th that had made the point quite a bit about the fact that they flow in and out of one another. They're not in conflict, but somehow we've gotten the idea that they do, and we have to choose one or the other.
Yeah, they're married. They're complementary to each other. There's a complementarity there. They answer different questions, but it's all the same truth. And I found my way into the Catholic Church because of my confidence in the order in the created world. I'm a chemist. I studied atoms, and I was amazed at the order and predictability and beauty at the atomic level. And that gave me confidence to believe there is a God, and that the God that there is the one of Christianity, is the one that revealed himself through the life of Christ and is Trinitarian and incarnational, which explains the order. And so it didn't seem like there was a conflict to me, but I guess the rest of the people that think there is a conflict, or our culture that thinks there's such a conflict, it's like me back in college. They just stop at this idea that theology isn't a real discipline. Nobody knows what that means. That we don't discover God through reason. If you have faith in God, it's kind of like you just decide to believe in the flying spaghetti monster because you want to have comfort and think you create these fictional godlike superheroes that's what people think God is to us. And then science has all these facts and theories and explanations and laws and models and textbooks jam-packed with information that you can verify. And science seems to have the better answer to questions about our existence. On the surface, I mean, that's a very myopic view, but I think a lot of people just don't get past that. They're not led to wonder what theology is. They're not led to wonder, why do we believe God exists in the first place? They're not led to go further about why is it that we believe there's a Holy Trinity, and that the second person of the Holy Trinity is God incarnate. And, where does all this come from? And I really think a big solution to solving the conflict idea is just more knowledge, more teaching, more explaining about I look at it as getting underneath things. So there has to be some desire to get underneath what it is we're saying and say why we're saying it in the first place. Where does that belief come from? Is that belief reasonable? Why for questions like this, why do we even want to do science? Why, as human beings, do we want to discover the order and beauty in the natural world and nature and then seek to manipulate it? It can't just be about scientists becoming famous. There has to be a deeper reason why the human race itself wants to do something like that. And so it's exciting because that all I'm talking about there is the search for truth. And as Catholics, we know we're made to search for truth. I find it heartbreaking that a lot of young people, especially growing up, never hear that. They don't even realize that yearning is in them to search for truth, and that in searching for truth, they're searching for God. So a lot of the work I do, I just see it as taking the blinders off, breaking the chains, and helping people discover in their freedom all the truth that's out there to be known.
Yeah, and to get a little personal, let's go back a little and talk about your life before you discovered that, so that you can kind of relate it to maybe some of the crises that some of our young people and other scientists are going through. Because obviously, if scientists are known for probing and just wanting to discover the truth, and if you don't have that whole dimension to work with, you're going to have a crisis at some point. So what was your crisis like?
Well, it was the blinders on. I mean, when I do my work now, I say to myself, Stacy, this isn't just about you wanting to understand. There has to be a purpose to your work. And so for me, it is to try to warn people, younger people especially, to try to warn them about what happens to you if you do lead a life of scientism. So we'll talk more about scientism in a minute, but just for now, it is that belief, like I had, that you think science has all the answers. You don't think you need philosophy. You don't even know what that is. You don't think you need the theology. You don't think you need faith. You don't need to believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. You don't need to go to church. Don't need to go to Mass. You just do what you're going to do, and you trust yourself that you're going to do the right thing. Wrong. It's not so easy as that. And when I went off to college, and I had that mindset, I'm free of religion. I don't have to go to Sunday school and church with my parents anymore. I can sleep in on Sunday. I don't have to feel guilty if I don't go. I don't need to worry about God. I don't need to worry about shame and guilt and all of that. I'm just free now. I can do what I want to do. That freedom was false freedom. That wasn't freedom. It was going through life without the guardrails on. And I made bad choices. A lot of people, young people, make bad choices. Well, I made bad choices with, I thought, impunity. I can do what I want as long as I'm not hurting anybody else. And that doesn't work. You can't do what you want and not affect somebody else. And by the time I was in my 30s, I was a single mother of 2 children. And the thing that really got my attention, I think a lot of people in their 30s really start thinking about life, because you can't get away with saying, I'm a baby adult, I'm a new adult. You can say that when you're 20 or 21 maybe, but by the time you're 30, you need to grow up. And you don't get excuses for being a puppy running through the house breaking stuff anymore. You have to be responsible. And that, for me, it was realizing I was not being a good mother to my children, and I didn't know how. And just to close this off, I'm dead serious. At my PhD dissertation, I referred to my 2 children as highly complex composite systems of atoms and molecules, my best syntheses that I had ever made. So yeah, I thought they were my best productions, but I still looked at them as collections of atoms. And when you're a mother and you look at your children that way, they're just like little machines. You don't really, that wreaks havoc on your ability to love them, to see them as human persons, because you're like, okay, well, I need to take them to this daycare. I need to drop them off there. I need to pick them up here. I need to put them in ballet. I need to put them in art lessons. You're just kind of checking the boxes like you would in a chemical reaction, very mechanistically moving people through things. And my view of science having all the answers completely shut down, crippled my ability to think about love and relationships, and it wreaked havoc on my relationships. And I take responsibility for my bad choices, but underneath it all, I didn't even know what it meant to be in a relationship with a child, with my parents, with a man, with anybody. I didn't understand this whole two become one thing. And so, I mean, that is the ultimate, as far as I can think of, that's the ultimate consequence of having this scientific worldview, is you shut down that part of you, that human part of you that needs to understand virtue and morality and love and justice and all the things we talk about in the Catholic Church. So when I started learning about that stuff, and I realized the human is body and rational soul, that was a game changer for me. That changed everything, and I drank it up, and I tried very hard. 20 years later, I'm understanding that the path to perfect virtue is a lifelong pursuit, but at least I have the tools now to help with things like prudence, to make good decisions, and to understand love and relationships. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that has broken society, I think, is this idea that science has all the answers, and it doesn't have the most important answers at all.
Yeah, I was thinking, what do you think? I mean, obviously it's hard to pinpoint, but where did that happen? What can you find like an explosive moment where we kind of just departed from reason? Because like sometimes I've had to come back to the basics, like even talking to my kids or whomever. You can't have something from nothing, just like explaining that there's a God. I mean, to use our reason, it's like we shut off our reason in trying to find the line in the textbook somewhere. And we can't have a conversation that involves our reason. We have to shut that down. Is there something in your research and your exploration that you've identified kind of some major points that we kind of diverged from reason?
Well, I think the philosophical textbook answer in the Catholic Church is modern philosophy. And that's something I've been trying to get my head around. And, I'm studying philosophy now because I realized not only did I not know theology, I also didn't know philosophy. But there's this ancient philosophy of the Greeks, and there's this Aristotelian, Thomistic, scholastic philosophy, and there and other types of philosophy too, but that's the one of St. Thomas Aquinas. And then there is this departure from everything Aristotelian and Thomistic, and this embracing of empiricism and a mechanistic worldview that came about around the time of the rise of modern science, around the 16th, 17th, 18th century, and so on. And so a lot of work that philosophers do today is to try to bring us back to scholasticism and Thomism. I'm a Thomist, and all that I just said, that's not going to connect with a teenager. That's not going to.
Right.
They're not going to understand that. But it's also like when I grew up Protestant, I didn't realize what Protestantism is. I didn't realize, and I'm pretty sure a lot of Protestants today don't realize the history behind that. Likewise, a lot of people growing up today and this explosion of science that we live in still, I mean, science is still exploding in our lifetime. It's not like it did explode and it's over now. We're picking up the pieces. Think about how much your mobile phones have changed in the last 5 years. Technology is moving forward in leaps and bounds. And so I think a lot of people walking around today with us just don't realize what was lost. And so if modern philosophy is the thinking behind it all that is responsible for this heavy empiricism and this mechanistic worldview, then bringing the wholeness of the immaterial and the material, the spiritual and the bodily, bringing that all back together is the work to be done. But the question is, how do we communicate that to just your everyday person who gets up and goes to work every day, or your college student trying to survive college? And it takes time. And I do a lot of work with young people. And I've decided one of the biggest things you can do to bring this about is to legitimately earn their trust. It's about trust. They have to see me as a responsible person, a 55-year-old woman living a life that's joyful, that includes suffering, that has hard work, humility. They have to see me living the life of faith in a way that is winsome to them, in a way that they say, I want that. I want to be an old woman like that one day. As I look at older people and I model myself after them, and I want to be that same kind of person. And I think that's what we older Catholics need to do. We need to role model what it looks like to live with hope, faith, and love. And that means earning their trust. And then when they do trust you and they look up to you as someone who has something they want in their future, they will ask you questions. They will listen to you. And then you can start talking about philosophy and theology and science and all these other things. So that's sort of been my mode of operation is, I know there's a lot of scholars and they spend a lot of time in the scholarly aspect of things. I try not to get into that trap. It's a safe place to go because you're not personally investing yourself into it. I try to make sure on social media in my writing that I also put myself into it so that I'm somebody real. I'm a woman who's now a grandmother, who's got parents who are getting older, whose husband lost his parents, who is grappling with the insecurities of going back to school in my 50s because I'm on a search for truth. I'm trying to just live that real life, and it does work. So maybe. I would like to think that my students look up to me. I would like to think there's plenty of young people who know I'm a trusted person they can come and ask if they have questions about this stuff. And I think if we all just do that, then that's my thought, that it will have a change. But there's no magic bullet either.
Yeah. It's interesting that what you said earlier about how you described your children on your dissertation, and then and how that lack of relationship and the mechanization of relationships, and now you've switched completely over to that the relationship, the human soul relationship is the most important thing. And it's so basic, but it's really so beautiful because we can forget those simple things. And I, even as parents, I think we can forget that, and to come back to just love, right? And that is something that our Christian faith teaches. That is what Christ taught us, and you're not going to find that in a science manual.
No, absolutely not. You will look in vain.
Yeah. I'm curious. I just want to go back to one more thing. Back when you had abandoned your faith, what did you think about people who were religious? Like, what was your mindset then? I just want to kind of peer into your brain back then.
And I've had a lot of time to reflect on it, especially when I think about how can I connect with young people. I knew that the people who thought I should be going to church, if I had a conversation with them about not going to church anymore, they were just going to make me feel guilty. They were just going to try to correct me. They were probably not going to ask me why or what I was concerned about. They were just going to say, tush, tush, you should be doing that. You should be going. And I would have, so I didn't want to have those conversations. I didn't want to be told I was doing something wrong. And you know how we do this exercise when we're older. What would you say to your 20-year-old self? If I could sit down with my 20-year-old self, I would tell her that the things you're feeling are legitimate. Like these things you're struggling with are real, and the questions you have are good ones. And let's see if we can find answers to it. I think the problem with some of that is sometimes us adults don't really know what the answers are ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so we're not sure how to, because I do Catholic radio where anybody can call in and ask me anything. And I like doing that because it really pushes me to be ready to answer and not freak out. But we have to be willing to hear their questions, and look at what the questions they're going to have today. A 20-year-old's going to have. They've got questions about internet, social media. They don't even remember life without it. They've got questions about the LGBT community. They've got questions about why does the church teach this or that regarding sexuality? What is marriage anyway? I think a lot of people, Pope Francis is right. A lot of people walking around out there don't even know what marriage means. A lot of people who are married don't even know what marriage means. And what does it mean to have a relationship? And so these young people today are struggling with so much. There's depression, there's addiction, there's suicide, there's greater and greater threats of war in our world. And I think they do need people that they can express their concerns to. But we, in the older generation, we have to be able to listen to them and not freak out about it and not overreact and not just try to shut them down, to really listen, because I don't know what it's like to grow up with social media. I've tried to stay involved with it ever since 2008 when I first discovered it. And I pretty much just hide on Facebook now because everything else is like hard drugs. It scares me to death. I don't want to go near Reddit. I don't even like tiptoeing into Twitter right now. But these younger people do. And my own children tell me that. And it is a different world for them. So the ability to listen and not jump to conclusions, but just hear what they're saying, I think that's part of how we build trust now. And it has nothing to do with faith and science, but it's just connecting with these younger people.
So I love the compassion you have for the younger generations, and I think you're spot on. I also sometimes feel that our generation needs a little bit of compassion because that world is so vastly different, and we do feel empty-handed a lot in answering those questions. It is scary for us because we have lived in a different world and we don't know all the answers, and yet we're supposed to be mentoring people and guiding our young people into the future. What can you say to those of us in our generation? I mean, you have kind of spoken to that already, but on the compassionate note, how do we deal with what we've been given? Because it's a lot that's been kind of slapped on our laps as we try to have wisdom for younger generations. How do we navigate that?
Yes, and that is such a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because there are times when I felt like it's completely not fair. It's not fair to expect me or us to be able to understand something that we did not live through. And this idea, I was saying it to my 29-year-old son yesterday, who just got out of the Navy after 8 years, and he's got a civilian job. And, I was telling him, none of us are really experts at being the age we are, because you only get to be that age for 1 year and then you move on. And, trying to get him to understand that I am at the age I am, and I've only been here now. This is the first time that I've ever been 55, and it's the first time he's ever been 29. And that we're all trying to do the best we can, but we're all getting older together. And so for people our age, do have compassion for yourself and for each other. I think we need to stick together and support each other a little more. Just something that is very near and dear to your heart, Roxanne, and something you do in your work, and you do it so well. There's a lot of parents dealing with children, adult children, who are leaving the faith, who are becoming lesbian, or who are becoming gay, or who are having transgender issues, or who are having surgeries, or even just broken marriages, or all kinds of things. There's a lot of people, parents our age, they're dealing with this with their children, and they need to support each other. And that's what you've done. That's what you and Patty did with your book. You're helping parents come together and support each other, because it's really hard for us to understand the younger generation, because it was not like that for us. There are things they're doing now that I never even knew to worry about. I never even thought it would be a thing, and now it's a thing. So I love that you bring parents together to help support each other. And we do need to do that. And I guess the whole reason I'm saying that is because a lot of it we don't want to talk about, because we ourselves are ashamed of how things turned out with our kids. And we don't know if it's our fault or if we did something wrong. And so we keep quiet about it and we don't talk about it. And being able for us to talk with other people our own age and share. I had a gathering of women from my parish because we always see each other in mass, but we don't get to talk very much. I just had a gathering of like 15 women over to my house, and we just went around the circle. Tell us what you're struggling with, because probably there's something about your life that the rest of us don't know about, and we could support you. 2 hours later, we were not even around the circle yet
Wow.
because
Yeah.
everybody's dealing with so much and we don't talk about it. So
Yeah.
compassionately, the friendship doesn't need to go just down to the younger generation. It needs to go across to people our own age, because we're all suffering with something. We're all dealing with something. That's part of the joy of a life of faith. You learn how to do that
Mhm.
better, but you can't do it alone.
Yeah. I was thinking, I know we've kind of gone off track from the scientism discussion, but not
Yes.
really as far as like the faith goes, because it's moments like that where we have to come to a posture of humility and just admit that we don't know and that
Mhm.
we're grappling along, like you said. Like I think that's one of the places where we can converge for sure with any generation. They're suffering, and guess what? We are too. Like suffering is a part of the human condition, and it is what can lead us to God. So those things all do actually come together at some point.
Mhm.
Before we take a little break here, I want to come back to this beautiful definition that I heard, and what was one of the things that drew me to you when you said science is the study of the handiwork of God. How did you come up with that? And just share a little bit about that, because I just love it.
When I was writing Particles of Faith, we lived in a secluded little cabin in the Adirondack foothills up in New York. And so I didn't have a lot of interaction with people. And we had 5 little kids at home during those years. And they were homeschooling. Well, one day my youngest child, a son, JJ, he was 4 at the time. He heard me teach online classes and talk about atoms all the time. I was teaching my chemistry students online at Colby Academy about atoms, and atoms make up everything, and this is what atoms are, and atoms are so wonderful, and I love atoms. Well, he started asking questions. Is this made of atom? Is my arm made of atoms? Is that tree made of atoms? And it went on for several months. Is everything made of atoms? The air made of atoms? And, yes, JJ, yes, JJ, yes. Well, one night, Dad took the girls out somewhere for dinner, and it was just JJ and me at home. And I made him spaghetti and meatballs, his favorite. And I said, okay, JJ, say your prayer before we eat. I want you to say it by yourself, because you're 4 and you should be able to. So he did, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy atoms, which we are about to receive. Oh, my goodness.
Wow.
And I thought that is, because at the same time, I'm looking for the one liner that sums up my book, Particles of Faith. What is the message here? And I'm like, that's it. He just said that. He does not look at the meal and say, gee, I wonder if my mom exists. He's not looking
Mhm.
at the meal and saying, I wonder if God exists. And it's the same way with science. We don't look at nature and say, oh, I wonder if God exists or not because of nature. We start with faith. We believe God exists because we know that from reason. We know that from
Mm.
faith and divine revelation. And we look at the universe and say, thank you, God, for what's here. Now let's roll up our sleeves as scientists and go discover it. And so that one little realignment of worldview, I give that to all my students. And it really does change everything for them. They're no longer burdened about this conflict, but it removes the conflict with faith and science. Now science is studying God's handiwork. There's no more conflict. It all fits together now. And science doesn't answer all questions, but it answers a whole lot of questions. And it's really cool when you discover that, because now you're peering into the mind of God a little more when you do all those equations and balance equations and do math and chemistry. You're understanding God's mind a little more. So it's a game changer.
Mm. Well, I love how you bring your motherhood into your science, because that's a special gift. Women are really, feminine genius, the relational aspect of us, and that you are able to combine those two is so beautiful. So I just thank you for that. Well, we'll take a little bit of break here, and then when we come back, I want to dive more into scientism, because again, I think it's something that few people, I didn't really know about it until you told me. I didn't really put those two things together. So we will take a little break with more Matters of Soul Importance with Dr. Stacy Trasancos on the other side of this pause.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. Roxanne Solonin here with Dr. Stacy Trasancos, or Stacy as I know her. We've had a chance to meet. We've had different conversations, and I've really admired her work. As I alluded to right before, or said right before the break, that the combination she has as both a mother and a scientist is such a beautiful combination. And I think it can lead a lot of people deeper into the discussion we're having, which is connecting the head and the heart, really. And both are important in this discussion. And of course, the soul as well. So I want to get back to this driving question of science versus scientism, because I think a lot of people might be hearing this for the first time, Stacy. And so at what point did you discover the difference and that there was such a thing? At what point did you come to this realization that scientism is kind of the issue that is, well, there's this departure from reason and everything. Tell us what is your definition, I guess, of scientism? Let's start there.
Right. Scientism is sort of a take on the word science. So science derives from the Latin scientia, meaning knowledge. And that's how Aquinas used the word science. So science is a body of knowledge. Scientism refers more to what we have today. So how did that one word, and I take my students through this, that word science came to mean something different in the modern time, in the last couple hundred years. Science now, if you say it, people think of physical science. They think of biological science. Even though we still have social science and economical science, people don't really think of that. And those would fit body of knowledge. But they think of this study of nature, physics, chemistry, and biology, the hard sciences, the STEM sciences. And that's what the word has come to mean in the late 19th century onward. And so from that, then, the word scientism arose, and it is the belief that only knowledge obtained from scientific research is valid. Only knowledge obtained from scientific research is valid. And what do they mean, scientific research? It means empirical research, where there is a hypothesis, series of tests, set up, whether we're talking about pharmaceuticals or medical or biological or even physics and chemistry. And the tests are done and the data has to be there, is collected and analyzed. And it's a process. That is a wonderful process for discovering the secrets of nature. And it's a wonderful process even in social sciences and economical sciences. But it's not the only way to discover something. It rules out all of the deductive knowledge that was obtained through philosophy and theology. It rules out asking any bigger questions in Aristotelian terms beyond efficient and material cause. It rules out asking about formal cause, like what is the form of this thing? What is the essence of it? What's the purpose of it? And final cause, what is the end of this thing? What is it supposed to be used for? Which is another way of saying purpose as well. So it takes purpose off the table. And then that's why you have all these people trying to bring purpose back, like The Purpose-Driven Life. Remember that book? Mm-hmm. You have people trying to bring purpose back into the picture. And I didn't realize how much that had gone away until I started studying it, until I started examining my own ideas. Even as I'm confronting philosophy now, I'm rooting out materialism that I was still hanging on to, that I didn't even realize. I still thought of the world as built up from atoms, particles assembled together. But the way the church teaches it and the Aristotelian Thomistic view is hylomorphism, we look at things from the top down, a form, a God-given form, and the matter is disposed to the form. And so it's not, everything's not just a bunch of particles. Everything is the thing first, and then the matter is there to make it become that thing, a real thing. And so scientism just lops off. And I say it like putting the blinders on, because that's what it felt like for me. It felt like I climbed this mountain, and all I was doing while I was working on a PhD in chemistry and a job at DuPont, all I was doing was looking down at the ground, climbing higher and higher and higher on my mountain of knowledge, science, physical science. And I got to the top, and it was time to look out at the rest of knowledge. And, you get to the top of that mountain and you look out at the landscape, but I didn't want to do it. I was too scared to do it. All I wanted to do was think about science. I didn't want to look up. And when I took that leap of faith, that it really was for me in a very tangible way, like looking up, and not just looking up, but leaping into this chasm and trusting God will help me fly, that we need two wings, faith and reason, like Pope St. John Paul II said. And it really was like flying anew. Like I'm suddenly seeing the whole world with this bigger view. And that's what I want for other people too. And so scientism just keeps you with the blinders on, looking down at the ground, and you need courage to take that leap of faith.
What a great visual for those of us who like visuals. That's beautiful. Another thought I've had that seems so basic, and I don't understand why more people don't understand. But if you go to the basic, definition of science of just the study of the natural world, then when it comes to talking about supernatural,
Yes.
scientists can't speak on that. But yet they try, or they, they have an opinion or whatever about it. But that's a whole other realm. Science can't speak on the supernatural because the supernatural is beyond the natural world.
Yes.
I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I feel like that's a basic thing that I run into sometimes when having some conversations about God.
Yes. And the best entrance from nature to supernature is the way Aristotle does it in physics. He starts out in physics wanting to study what's in front of him, what we can observe, a dog, an apple. He starts out wanting to do that. And then he works through it. And, you're going to start out with what you can observe at the macroscopic level, just to use modern science terms. But then you go into the microscopic level, the nanoscopic level, just like we have done. We have probed into the inner structure of matter. But he also, by the end of physics, he's gotten to the doorstep of metaphysics. He's gotten to the point of saying, all of this points to a first cause, a first mover. And so he really kind of discovers God in physics. And for me in my life, it was the same way. Chemistry led me to Christ. I had to admit God exists. And then it's a matter of, okay, who's talking about God in the right way? The Catholic Church. So he discovers God, but he doesn't have all the understanding of God. Nobody has all the understanding, but he doesn't have, obviously, Christ. Christ hasn't come yet. Well, then what Aquinas does is he brings divine revelation from Christ into Aristotelian natural philosophy. And he calls studying nature the preambles to faith. And it very much is. We should be able to study everything in physical science, but that should lead us to ask the bigger question. Who created all of this? Why is the world like this? What's the reason for this? And Catholicism has a beautiful explanation in the Holy Trinity about why the world is created, why it's not a God itself, like pantheism would say, why the world is created with order, God the Father, the Logos, the order, rationality, and why the world is created good, why it's all on a journey towards being reunited with God. And so we have an explanation for that.
Right now, I'm looking out my window, and as you're talking, I'm seeing like some evergreen trees and just a lot of green out there right now. And I'm thinking about where we kind of got lost, and I'm thinking of us, and me included, looking into my phone, looking into my computer for the answers, and just looking into the screens. And it's so refreshing because I try to take a walk every day and just whatever season we're in. And I just, it like brings me back to life, just to be in nature. And I'm just thinking, sometimes I think our younger people, I've gotten this impression that they think, oh, we're more evolved now, and we don't need church anymore because we have more knowledge. But I think what we don't have is, number one, wisdom, which is different than just knowledge, and then the other thing is just the natural, like looking out into the world. Like I feel like we're just looking into our screens more, and so we're missing.
Yeah.
We're not asking those bigger questions because we're absorbed in looking into a screen. And again, I know we're all victims of that, but sometimes it just takes walking outside. I know you had a moment with a tree when you were in college, right? The big, I can't remember, it was a Japanese tree or something, but
Ginkgo biloba.
Share a little bit about that, because I think that's kind of connecting with what I'm saying here. And I don't know.
That was my moment. I mean, I remember, because of my work in college, graduate work research was to simulate the electron transfer process in photosynthesis for the sake of building composites that could take light energy and turn it into energy to synthesize things. So little batteries using light like photosynthesis does. So basically what I'm doing, I don't believe in God. I'm in the state-of-the-art laboratory working on a terminal degree in chemistry, trying to replicate just a tiny fraction of what's happening in nature all around us. And I came to a standstill in my research. I couldn't make atoms do what I wanted them to do. And science is like that. You can't force nature to do what it doesn't do. Mm-hmm. And I had a moment where, if I can't achieve this electron transfer on these nanocomposites I'm building, I'm not going to graduate. I'm not going to get a job. My life is over. And I just remember looking out at this ginkgo biloba tree that was outside my third story window at Chanley Laboratory at Penn State University. And just in my frustration and desperation at that point, looking at that tree and just remembering what my mom told me when I was a little girl: God made everything. That God made the tree, God made the big round sun, God made me. There's a song like that. And it hit me that I'm in this laboratory trying to reproduce what God's doing all the time out there. There must be a God. There must be this great chemist who created everything out there. And I didn't, but I remember that specifically because I remember thinking that. I also remember saying, I don't care. I remember saying, that's not going to help me graduate. That's not going to help me solve my problem right now. It's not going to help me make the electrons jump where I want them to so I can graduate. And I just remember getting angry and tightening my ponytail and turning around and throwing my stuff in the trash so I could go start over. I had a little fit. And just, I don't care about the bigger question. I just care about graduating and getting a job. And I remember thinking that. I remember just putting the blinders on and saying, I'm not going to look up. I don't want to. I don't have time for it. It's not going to get me where I want to go. And I think a lot of people think that you don't need God to get where you want to go, but you do.
Yeah, what I was thinking, I think that's part of the mindset right now is, yeah, there probably is something out there. I could go with that, but I don't have time for that. That's not helpful to me right now. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing in some people out there now. And it's like at some point though, Stacy, you had to confront it. At some point, the blinders had to come off at some point. And I think the 30s, I think you're right. I think there's a time that we kind of have to grow up and quit blaming our parents for whatever they did or didn't do, because guess what? They're human too. And really face these big questions. Because I think we're kind of at a point, it's a critical time where so many people haven't asked those questions and have disregarded and put their blinders on. Can you kind of speak a little bit to that? I know what you said earlier, that's kind of your mission, is to try to reach out and peel those, help those blinders go up a little bit. Would you say it is a critical time for us to kind of wake up and start to merge these two things and to take a different look at this scientism idea that we have to have everything that we have to disregard like our reason. Have we kind of reached a critical point, would you say, or do you have a more hopeful outlook?
I think we've been there for a long time. I've gotten comfortable with the idea that the world's just never perfect, and we have our own set of problems today. Our parents had their set of problems. Our kids are going to have their set of problems. But one of the things for sure is this: if two things for anyone, for you listening, two things. Start to notice how much the idea of scientism has invaded our culture. So a lot of people don't use that word, but start to notice this extreme reliance on science to give us answers for things. And, I'm not just talking about, laugh at the atheist scientists because they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, laugh at the silly. No, I mean, even good, well-meaning Catholics sometimes they're too reliant on science in the sense that they're too scared of what science may say. We don't have to be afraid of science. Scientists are people too, and sometimes they do say dumb things. But our job is to correct that. So start to notice just how much scientism has taken over our culture, this over reliance on science. And then when you get an opportunity, correct people. Science is the study of the handiwork of God. An atheist might say, well, I don't believe in God. Okay, but I believe in God. You don't believe in God. We're studying the same nature. I just have an answer for where nature came from and you don't. But we can talk about nature otherwise the same. And then the second thing, besides looking for scientism pervasive in our culture, notice in the Catholic sphere, when you go to Mass, when you recite the prayers, I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth, God the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, creator of everything. And if you listen to the Bible that's read at every Mass, if you listen to the Old Testament and the New Testament, and this typological idea where the old in light of the new and the new in light of the old, you will see this science is the study of the handiwork of God. You will see this deep respect for God's handiwork as creation throughout our liturgy, our hymns, the readings from the Bible, the writings from saints. You'll see it everywhere. This is a thoroughly Catholic worldview that we look at nature as God's creation. And we revere it as that, but we don't worship it. We don't worship nature. We don't worship science. We wouldn't think science had all the answers. And so if you start to pay attention to those two things, for me, it really did give me a great clarity. There is this clinging to science because people need something to believe in, and they're picking that. So it's an opportunity for evangelization. And then there's this deep, ancient view of creation thoroughly in our Catholic world that we just need to be sharing. And so I've been telling people, think of it like this: instead of not knowing what to say about science or being upset with scientists, see science as evangelize through science. See it as an opportunity for evangelization. I have never had a person hear me talk about that one-on-one or in a group. I've never had a person just get down right there on their knees and become Catholic on the spot, just like I didn't when I saw that ginkgo biloba tree. It took years for that to settle into my mind and for me to have the courage to make a change. But speak about it anyway, because you are absolutely planting seeds, as they say. Speak about it anyway. Your confidence in saying these things, and that's why I like science is the study of the handiwork of God, because people can remember it. You don't have to know anything about science or theology to be able to know the truth of that. And you can say that to a student and it will give them something to think about. It immediately gives them an answer to where does it all come from? And it invites them into a deeper conversation. So, just look for opportunities. And if you pray about it, God will put opportunities to have those conversations in front of you more than you ever could have expected.
Beautiful. And I do want to address our Protestant listeners too. Is there any resource you would give that can help them? Maybe there's a little spark today that made them want to know more or whatever, or anyone really. Where would you
Yes.
send them?
I mean, this is one place where we're completely united. I mean, the Protestants will also say that science is the study of God's handiwork. We are united in that belief, that worldview that God created everything. I don't know of any Protestant who thinks we should worship the world as a God itself. That's completely at odds with Christianity completely. So we are united here. And when I wrote Particles of Faith, and I would recommend that book just because I did write it with Protestants in mind, with any Christian in mind. I talk about how science was born of Christianity, not Catholicism. I say Christianity on purpose, because this all happened at a time before we went separate ways, and it's something that unites us all. So there's a lot that we can work together on there. And just as evidence of that, Particles of Faith was reviewed and it was popular at BioLogos, which is they say a non-denominational faith and science organization. It is an invitation for us to work together. It's like pro-life issues. We're united on pro-life issues too. It's something that we can all work together on.
Absolutely. And I will put a link in the show notes to that book. And it is a really illuminative read. So I appreciate your work, and I appreciate you trying to bring it down to the layperson's level also. I'm a little bit intimidated by the world of science, but at the same time, everything you said today makes sense to me. And I know that you're taking a lot of information and distilling it down for us. So I appreciate your ability to write also and to speak these things, because that's part of it, right? Is to be able to reach us. So, well, thank you so much, Dr. Trasancos. Is there anything else you would like to share today? I know you have some different ministries and you travel around speaking. What are some of the activities that you're doing right now that you would want to share about right now?
Well, I have a new Substack called God and Elements, and I'm getting that going now, and I'm starting a PhD program in philosophy this week. I travel to Ireland, where I will be a new PhD student in their philosophy program there at St. Patrick's Pontifical University. So it's a pontifical university where I will work more in Thomism and the philosophy of nature. And one thing I really have in mind is to try to help scientists themselves have the language to talk about hylomorphism and concepts that are compatible with Christianity. So if you want to follow what I'm thinking about and learning, subscribe to God and Elements, the Substack. You can subscribe for free, because I plan to sort of use that as, I think best. I'm a writer, and as you know, Roxanne, I think best when I can write my thoughts down. So I plan to keep this going. My writing is always a way to force myself to say things in a way that makes sense. I don't ever want to hide behind big scholarship, big words, where I'm safe and nobody can criticize me except other scholars. I want to be held accountable if something I say doesn't make sense. So subscribe to God and Elements.
Yes. I'm glad that you brought that up. I've been paying attention to that as well, and appreciate continuing to look at your journey and learn along with you. So thank you so much, Dr. Trasancos. I've appreciated this talk and getting to hear more from you and to share that with others. So have safe travels to Ireland. That sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. God bless you.
God bless you.
Science versus scientism. What is the difference? Dr. Trasancos defines scientism as a mindset that allows only knowledge obtained from scientific or empirical research to be valid. As she said, while that is a wonderful process for discovering the secrets of nature, it's not the only way to discover something, and rules out such things as deductive knowledge, not to mention allowing the asking of the bigger questions, including the purpose of a thing. She proposes turning that approach on its head in a way, and to do what the wise men of old, like Aristotle, did, looking at things from the top down. I loved her image of climbing a mountain, never looking up, only down at the ground, but getting further away from understanding. But once she realized what she was doing, her perspective widened, and she was able to see so much more. That is what faith is like, seeing more, not less, as some would have us believe. It is not following blindly, but following freely, not being constrained to what we can see in a scientific lab, but being free to answer the big questions about life and why we're here in the first place. And as Dr. Trasancos said, what is our purpose? If we can't ask that question and search freely for the answer, we're going to waste the short amount of time we've been given here on Earth, as well as living for the much longer and significant portions of our lives in eternity. Put that way, understanding scientism and how it blocks and blinds us is significant and even life-changing. Dr. Trasancos certainly gave us something to think about, and I'm ever grateful that she's asked those big questions and continues to keep discovering the rich answers along the way. In our next episode, we will ask, whose mother drew this former porn worker out of the industry? Until then, don't lose sight of the light.